doctor tore up the nurse's report. 7 months later, she becomes the hospital owner. Emily Johnson watched the pieces of paper scatter across the cold hallway floor as Dr. Richard Thompson finished tearing up her report. The cruel smile on his face burned more than any words he could have spoken. "Ordinary nurses like you don't have the right to question licensed doctors," he said, adjusting his white coat arrogantly. "Remember that well, all of you." The humiliation unfolded in front of at least 15 people. Other nurses lowered their eyes, doctors chuckled quietly, and some janitors stopped to watch the scene. Emily felt her face burn with shame. "Doctor, I was just doing my job," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "Your job is to obey, not to think." He stepped closer, speaking softly but loud enough for others to hear. "If you don't like the rules, you can find another job. Replacing you won't be hard." Emily bent down to pick up the torn pieces of the report she had spent 3 days preparing. Her hands shook as she gathered each fragment. That document contained evidence that expired medications were being used on patients in the general ward, especially those without insurance. "Leave it there," Dr. Richard ordered. "The cleaning crew will take care of it." She stood up slowly, trying to maintain her dignity. At 28, she had worked for 5 years at that public hospital in Oakland. She was a single mother of 2 young children, Ethan, 6, and Emma, 4. Her nurse's salary was all she had to support her family. "Everyone, back to work," Dr. Richard told the others. "And remember, hierarchy exists for a reason." The group quickly dispersed. Emily was left alone in the hallway, staring at the torn paper on the floor. Tears threatened to form in her eyes, but she swallowed them. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She returned to the ward where she worked the afternoon shift. It was a 20-bed unit, always full. Elderly patients, ordinary people who depended on the public healthcare system, they were the reason she had written that report. "Emily, what happened?" asked Margaret, a 62-year-old retired head nurse who still picked up shifts. "I saw you in the hallway with Dr. Richard." "He tore up my report about the expired medications," Emily replied, organizing the meds on her cart. Margaret sighed heavily. "Sweetheart, you have to be careful. That man is dangerous. His family has a lot of power in this hospital." "But Margaret, I can't stay silent while patients are given expired medicine. Just yesterday I saw an antibiotic vial that expired 3 months ago being given to Mr. William." "I know, dear, but you have children to raise. That Dr. Richard has already fired 3 nurses this year, all for insubordination." Emily stopped organizing the medications. "Fired them for what?" One questioned why he always ordered private tests for Medicaid patients. Another asked why expensive medications kept disappearing from inventory. The third dared to suggest improvements to the sanitation protocol. Emily's heart raced. She wasn't being targeted for no reason. "But that's illegal, Margaret." "Of course it is. But who's going to report it? He's the nephew of the hospital director. The Thompson family has controlled this hospital for over 20 years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The afternoon shift dragged on. Emily cared for her patients with the same tenderness as always, but her mind raced. She couldn't shake the image of expired medications being given to defenseless people. Around 6 in the evening, she got a call from her children's school. "Mrs. Emily, this is the school office. Ethan and Emma have been waiting for an hour. Did you forget?" Her heart raced. With all the chaos of the day, she had completely forgotten it was parent-teacher conference day, and she needed to pick the kids up early. "I'm on my way now," she said, hanging up quickly. She looked for Mrs. Margaret to let her know she needed to leave 15 minutes early, but the head nurse had already gone. She went to the administrative supervisor. "I need to leave 15 minutes early. It's a family emergency," she explained to the clerk. "I'll mark it as a partial absence. It'll be deducted from your pay." Emily agreed. She had no choice. She grabbed her purse and ran to the bus stop. The school was a 40-minute ride away. She arrived breathless, finding Ethan and Emma sitting alone in the empty courtyard. "Mommy!" Emma ran into her arms. "I'm sorry, my loves. Mommy had a tough day at work." "The teacher said almost all the parents already came to pick up their kids," Ethan remarked, always observant. On the bus ride home, the children dozed in her lap. Emily stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Oakland wasn't any different from many other cities in the Greater Bay Area. It had rich and poor neighborhoods, people struggling to survive, and others born with privilege. She lived in a small rented house in Montclair. 2 tiny rooms, a bedroom, kitchen, and bathroom. The rent ate up almost half her salary. The rest went to food, transportation, the kids' school, and basic expenses. That night, after bathing the children and putting them to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She took out a blank sheet of paper and started rewriting the report that had been torn up. She wasn't giving up. This time she was more detailed. She wrote down specific dates, batch numbers of the expired medications, suppliers' names. She remembered every irregularity she had witnessed over the past few months. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital determined. She had decided to take the report straight to the board, bypassing Dr. Richard. But when she got to the department, she was met with an unpleasant surprise. Emily Johnson. A man in a suit was waiting for her at the nursing station. "Yes, that's me. I'm the HR supervisor. I need to speak with you." Her heart pounded. She followed the man to a small windowless room. "We've received a serious complaint against you," he said, placing a folder on the table. "What kind of complaint?" "Medical negligence. According to the report, you administered the wrong medication to 3 patients yesterday afternoon." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "That's a lie. I never." "We have witnesses, and per protocol, you're suspended immediately pending the investigation." "Who made this complaint?" "Dr. Richard Thompson. He said he saw you administering medication without checking the patient's name or dosage." Emily's hands shook with anger. "He's lying. This is retaliation because I filed a report about expired medications." "Ms. Johnson, I advise you to remain calm. Any aggressive behavior will be taken as confirmation of the allegations." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "How long will the investigation take?" "Between 15 and 30 days. During that time, you may not enter the hospital and will not receive pay. 30 days without pay, with rent due, kids to feed, basic bills." Emily felt despair take over. "Can I see the complaint report?" "No, it's confidential until the investigation concludes." She left the hospital in shock. She couldn't believe she was being punished for trying to protect patients. She sat at the bus stop and cried for the first time since it all began. At home, she looked at the overdue electricity bill, the rent due in a week, the food in the cupboard. With great effort, she could pay the rent using the money she had saved for emergencies. But what then? She spent the first days of her suspension searching for work. She visited 3 private hospitals in the area, 2 clinics, and even a few private practices. All of them asked for recommendation letters from her last job. How could she get those while suspended for medical negligence? During one of these visits, she happened to pass by a small public archive in the city. A sign indicated that historical documents from Oakland were stored there. For some reason she couldn't explain, she decided to go in. The place was small and dusty. A woman in her 70s greeted her. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for work, and I thought..." "Well, I don't really know what I thought," said Emily, feeling foolish. The woman smiled. "Sometimes we end up in places for reasons we only understand later. I'm Rose, in charge of the archive. What kind of work are you looking for?" "I'm a nurse, but I'm having some trouble at the hospital where I worked." "Which hospital?" "Oakland Community Hospital?" Rose's expression changed. "Ah, that hospital. My family has a complicated history with that place." "What do you mean?" Rose invited her to sit in an old chair near her desk. "My father worked there in the 70s. He was an administrator. He said there were a lot of things wrong, money disappearing. He tried to report it, but he was fired, and they even spread rumors that he stole medication." "Was it true?" "Of course not. My father was an honest man, but back then there weren't as many controls as there are today. Those with power could do whatever they wanted." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. "And who had the power?" "The family that controlled the hospital. The Thompsons. They still do, as far as I know." Emily's heart raced. She was being targeted by the same family that had targeted Rose's father 40 years ago. Rose, do you have documents from that time? I have a few. My father kept everything. He said the truth would come out one day. The woman stood and went to an old filing cabinet. She rummaged through several drawers until she found a yellowed folder. Here. He kept all the papers from when he worked there. Emily opened the folder carefully. Inside were contracts, invoices, internal memos. Her eyes widened when she saw one specific document. It was a meeting minutes from the hospital's board of directors, dated 1978. And there, mentioned by name, was her paternal grandfather, William Johnson. Rose, my grandfather is listed here as a member of the board of directors. Your grandfather? What was his full name? William Johnson. But he passed away when I was a child. My grandmother always said he was a simple merchant. Rose took the document and read it carefully. According to these minutes, William Johnson was one of the hospital's founders. He donated the land and a lot of money for its construction. Emily felt as if the world was spinning backward. That can't be right. My family was always poor. Sometimes families keep secrets, dear, or sometimes other people make sure the truth stays hidden. Rose kept sifting through the papers and found another document. Look here, a letter from your grandfather to the board, complaining about administrative irregularities. It's from 1979, just a few months before he died. Emily read the letter with trembling hands. Her grandfather had discovered that medication was being diverted and sold to private clinics. Exactly what she suspected was happening today. Rose, can I take copies of these documents? Of course. But be careful. If your family had trouble with the Thompsons in the past, stirring this up now could be dangerous. Emily left the archive with her mind racing. She got home and spread all the copies across the kitchen table. The more she read, the more shocked she became. Her grandfather wasn't just a simple shopkeeper. According to the documents, he had owned several pharmacies in the area and had heavily invested in building the hospital. He had also donated modern medical equipment for the time, but what impressed her the most was a letter he had written shortly before his death. In it, he said he suspected someone was poisoning his food because he was investigating the hospital's problems too deeply. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, the next morning she decided to visit her maternal grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy, who lived in a nursing home downtown. At 86, she still had a sharp mind, though she rarely spoke about the past. Grandma, I need to ask you about my grandfather, William. Mrs. Dorothy, who was knitting in an armchair by the window, stopped and looked at Emily in surprise. Why are you asking about your grandfather now? I found some documents that say he was wealthy, that he owned pharmacies and helped build a hospital. Her grandmother's face closed off. Emily, some things from the past are better left buried. But Grandma, I work at the hospital he helped build, and I'm being targeted there. I need to know the truth. Mrs. Dorothy set aside her knitting and sighed deeply. Your grandfather was a good man, but naive. He trusted the wrong people. What do you mean? He really did have money, a lot of it. He started with a small pharmacy and grew from there. When they decided to build that hospital, he was the biggest investor. And what happened? He found out they were stealing. Medicine went missing, money vanished from accounts. He tried to report it, but no one believed him. They said a simple pharmacist couldn't accuse respected doctors. And then he started investigating on his own, collected evidence, wrote everything down. He was ready to take it all to the authorities when Mrs. Dorothy's voice broke. When what, Grandma? When he suddenly fell ill. In 3 weeks, he was gone. The doctors said it was a heart problem, but he was strong as an ox. Emily felt a chill down her spine. Do you think? I can't prove anything. But in our last conversation, he told me that if anything happened to him, I should keep all the important papers. He said the truth would come out one day. And where are those papers? Mrs. Dorothy slowly got up and went to an old cabinet in the corner of the room. I've kept them all these years. Never knew what to do with them. She pulled out an old shoebox full of documents. Take it. If you're having trouble with the same people who went after your grandfather, maybe it's time to use this. Emily returned home with the box of documents. She spent the whole afternoon reading. There were land purchase contracts, donation receipts for the hospital, property deeds she didn't even know existed. But what shocked her the most was a will. According to the document, her grandfather had left 30% of the hospital's shares to his direct descendants, and she was the only living descendant left. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about everything she'd discovered. If the documents were real, she wasn't just a nurse being targeted. She was the rightful heir to part of the hospital where she worked. The next morning, she decided to find a lawyer. She knew Dr. Michael, who had defended a neighbor in a labor dispute. He was a simple man with a small office, but honest. "Emily, these documents seem authentic," he said after examining everything, "but I'll need time to verify their legal validity. Some things have changed since the 70s. Dr. Michael, could they try to stop me from investigating this? If what you suspect is true, they'll certainly try. But you have rights. And if these documents are valid, you have rights beyond what you can imagine." Emily left the lawyer's office feeling more hopeful, but also more frightened. She was dealing with powerful people who had proven they had no scruples. 2 days later, she received an unexpected call. "Emily, this is Margaret. I need to speak with you urgently." "Margaret, what happened? I can't talk over the phone. Can you come to my house?" Margaret lived in a small apartment in the Rockridge neighborhood. When Emily arrived, she found her visibly nervous. "Dear, they're spreading lies about you at the hospital." "What kind of lies?" "They're saying you stole medication to sell. That's why you were always questioning the inventory." Emily felt her blood boil. "That's absurd. I was trying to protect the patients." "I know, my dear, but they're convincing everyone. And there's more." "What?" "I overheard a conversation between Dr. Richard and the director. They're planning to report you to the nursing board. If that happens, you'll never work in the field again." Emily sank heavily into a chair. "Margaret, can I trust you?" "Of course, my dear." Emily told her everything she had discovered about her grandfather and the documents. Margaret listened in silence, her eyes wide. "Emily, this changes everything. If you really have rights to the hospital, I'm still investigating with a lawyer. But I need help. I need someone on the inside who can warn me about what's happening. You can count on me. I've worked there for 40 years. I've seen plenty of wrongdoing." "Did you already suspect the Thompsons before?" Margaret hesitated. "Emily, there are things I've never told anyone, but if you really are William Johnson's granddaughter, you need to know." "What do you mean?" "I knew your grandfather. I worked with him when the hospital was being built. He was an honorable man who truly cared about serving the poor." "You knew he was my grandfather?" "I suspected. You have his eyes, and the same determination. When I saw you working on that report, I was reminded of him." "What else do you remember?" "I remember he distrusted Dr. Thompson Sr., the current director's father. He said there was too much money involved and too little transparency. I also remember he fell ill suddenly." "You think it was—" "I can't say for sure. But I can tell you this. 3 weeks after your grandfather passed, Dr. Thompson Sr. took full control of the hospital. He claimed he had documents proving your grandfather sold his share." Emily's heart raced. "But that's not true." "Of course not. Your grandfather would never sell. But who was going to challenge it? His family was grieving. They didn't understand business." Emily left Margaret's house with even more determination. She called Dr. Michael. "Doctor, we need to speed up the investigation. They're trying to destroy my professional reputation." "Emily, I have news. I managed to verify some of the documents at the courthouse. Your grandfather's will is valid. And more, I found records showing his shares were never sold to the Thompsons." "Does that mean?" "It means you legally own 30% of the hospital, and the Thompsons know it." "How could they know?" "Because to take full control, they would have had to forge documents, and forgery leaves traces." That night, Emily barely slept. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd uncovered. This wasn't just about expired medication or mismanagement. It was about an illegal takeover that had lasted decades. The next morning, she received a call that sent her into a panic. "Miss Johnson, This is Ethan and Emma's school. We need you to come pick up the children immediately. What happened? A man came here claiming to be a relative of the children and wanted to take them. Since he wasn't on the authorized list, we didn't allow it. But he was very insistent. Emily rushed to the school. She arrived breathless and found Ethan and Emma in the office, visibly frightened. "Mum, a man said he knew Grandpa," Ethan said. "What man, sweetheart?" "A man in a suit. He knew our names." The school principal approached. "Mrs. Johnson, this man brought documents claiming he was a family attorney. He said you were struggling with mental health issues and that the children needed protection." Emily felt her blood run cold. "That's a lie. I'm fine. Someone is trying to hurt me." "We thought as much. That's why we called you right away. But I think it's best to file a police report." Emily took the children home and called Dr. Michael. "Doctor, now they're trying to mess with my kids." "Emily, this proves you're on the right track. They're desperate, but it also means you're in danger. You need to be careful." "What can I do?" "Let's speed up the legal process. I have contacts at the courthouse who can help authenticate the documents faster. And you should consider going public with what you've uncovered." "Go public how?" "Talk to the press or a regulatory agency. The more people who know, the harder it'll be for them to harm you." Emily considered the suggestion. She knew a journalist who had reported on issues in the Medicaid system. Maybe it was time to reach out. But before she could, she received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Richard Thompson himself. "Emily, may I come in? We need to talk." She hesitated but let him in. The children were at school, so she was alone. "I'm here to make an offer," he said, sitting on the living room sofa, uninvited. "What kind of offer?" "I know you've been asking questions about old matters, about your grandfather." Emily's heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. And I'm here to tell you this won't lead anywhere. My family has controlled that hospital for decades. Illegally," he smiled coldly. "Prove it. You have old documents, but you can't prove they're valid. And even if you could, you don't have the money for a legal battle against my family." "Maybe I do." "Do what?" "You're a suspended nurse with 2 kids to raise and no job. How long will it take for you to afford a good lawyer?" Emily felt he was trying to intimidate her, but doubt crept into her mind. "But I'm here to make a generous offer," he continued. "I'll drop the charges against you, reinstate you with a promotion, and even pay you $50,000 in compensation. In return, you forget this nonsense about your grandfather." $50,000. It was a lot of money for someone in Emily's situation. She could pay rent for months and give her kids a better life. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll learn. My family has far more power than you imagine. You may never work as a nurse again. They might even investigate whether you're fit to raise 2 children alone." The threat was clear. Emily felt fear and anger. "I need to think. You have until tomorrow. After that, the offer's off the table, and you'll face the consequences of your choices." After he left, Emily sat in the living room, trembling. She knew she was at a crossroads. She could take the money and give up the fight, securing safety for herself and her kids. Or she could keep fighting, risking everything. She called Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret, Dr. Richard was here. He made a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Emily told her everything. Mrs. Margaret listened in silence. "My dear, this is a decision only you can make. But let me tell you something. Your grandfather faced the same choice. He could have taken the money and stayed quiet, but he chose to fight for what was right. And look how that ended. It ended with him trying to do the right thing. And now you have the chance to continue what he started." That night, Emily talked to Ethan and Emma during dinner. She didn't share all the details, of course, but explained that Mommy was dealing with some problems at work. "Mommy, are you going to be okay?" Emma asked with her 4-year-old innocence. "I will, sweetheart. Mommy is going to fight to make everything right." "Like the heroes in cartoons?" Ethan asked. "Yes, my love, like the heroes." That night, after putting the children to bed, Emily made her decision. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Michael. "Doctor, I refuse the proposal. Let's move forward with the lawsuit." Are you sure, Emily? It won't be easy. I'm sure. My grandfather started this fight. I'm going to finish it. The next morning, Dr. Michael called with surprising news. Emily, you won't believe what I found. What is it? Remember I said I'd check other documents. I found something in the state archives. Your grandfather wasn't just a partner at the hospital. According to the original records, he was the majority shareholder. He owned 51% of the shares. Emily nearly dropped the phone. 51%? How? It seems in his final months, he bought out the shares of other partners who wanted to leave the business, and according to his will, everything passed to his descendants. That means you're not just a partner at the hospital, you're the majority owner. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily had to sit down. The scale of what she was discovering was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Dr. Michael, is this real? How did the Thompsons manage to control the hospital for so many years? Simple. They falsified the documents. They created fake papers showing your grandfather had sold his shares before he passed. Since your family didn't understand business and was grieving, no one questioned it. And now what can we do? Now we'll file for restitution of ownership, and we'll also report the irregularities to the authorities. How long will this take? With the documentation we have, not too long, maybe 2 or 3 months, but you need to be prepared. They'll fight back hard. Emily had barely hung up when the phone rang again. It was Mrs. Margaret speaking quietly. Emily, they're in panic at the hospital. Dr. Richard called an emergency meeting with the entire board. Do you know what they're talking about? I couldn't hear everything, but I heard your name several times. And I heard the director saying, the Johnson problem is back. The Johnson problem? That's what they called your grandfather back then. The Johnson problem. Now they're calling you the same thing. That afternoon, Emily received an official call from the hospital. Her suspension had been turned into a termination for gross negligence and inappropriate behavior. They can't do this, she protested. According to our records, they can. And you'll also face a defamation lawsuit for spreading lies about the hospital's administration. Furious, Emily hung up and immediately called Dr. Michael. Doctor, they fired me and are even talking about a defamation lawsuit. Perfect. Now we have even more proof they're trying to intimidate you. This will strengthen our case. But how am I supposed to survive without a paycheck? Emily, if we win this lawsuit, you'll never have to worry about money again. You'll own the hospital. But until then, Emily needed to find a way to survive. She started taking on extra jobs, caring for elderly people at home, giving injections on her own, anything to earn some cash. It was during one of these jobs that she met Mrs. Eleanor, an 80-year-old woman who needed home care. She was an elegant lady who lived in a large house in the Piedmont neighborhood. You remind me of someone, Mrs. Eleanor said on her second day of work. Who do I remind you of? A man I knew many years ago, William Johnson. You have the same kind eyes as his. Emily nearly dropped the medicine she was preparing. You knew William Johnson? Very well, he saved my life. How so? Mrs. Eleanor settled deeper into her armchair. It was 1978. I was very sick, given up on by doctors. William owned a pharmacy and managed to get an imported medication no one else had. He didn't charge me a thing. Said human life was worth more than money. And you knew him well? I did. He was an honorable man. When he started speaking about irregularities at the hospital, many people didn't believe him. But I did, because I knew his character. Do you know what happened to him? Mrs. Eleanor grew serious. I do. And I know his death wasn't natural. Emily's heart raced. How can you be sure? Because the last time we spoke, he told me he was being threatened, said if anything happened to him, I should find his family and tell them the truth. And why didn't you? I tried. But back then, his grandmother was devastated by the loss, and the Thompsons spread rumors that William had left the family in debt before he died. No one wanted to listen to a woman with theories. Emily sat beside Mrs. Eleanor. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm William Johnson's granddaughter, and I'm fighting to reclaim what was his. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. Praise the Lord. I always knew the truth would come out one day. Would you be willing to testify about what you know? Of course, my dear, it's long overdue. Emily immediately called Dr. Michael and told him about Mrs. Eleanor. This is excellent, Emily. Testimony from someone who knew your grandfather will strengthen our case immensely. What about the results from the document investigation? Good news. The handwriting expert confirmed the will is authentic. And more. We found evidence that the documents the Thompsons used to take control are forgeries. How much longer do we need? We're almost ready to file the lawsuit. 1 more week at most. But the Thompsons weren't going to wait a week. The next day, Emily was visited by 2 men in suits. Ms. Emily Johnson, we're from the health department. We received a complaint that you're practicing nursing without authorization. That's a lie. I have a valid professional license. According to our records, you were fired for medical negligence. This could result in the suspension of your license. They fined her and barred her from any nursing-related activities until the situation was clarified. Emily lost her main source of extra income. That night, sitting at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. Maybe she should have taken the $50,000. But then she thought of the grandfather she'd never really known, the injustices he'd suffered, the patients still receiving expired medications. She couldn't give up. The next morning, Dr. Michael called, excited. Emily, we did it. The judge accepted our initial petition. The lawsuit is filed. What now? Now the Thompsons will be officially notified. They'll have 15 days to respond. And how long until the final decision? If all goes well, between 2 and 3 months. But there's something important. The judge ordered an independent audit of the hospital while the case is ongoing. Is that good? It's great. If they find the irregularities you reported, it will strengthen our case significantly. 2 days later, the audit began. Mrs. Margaret called every day with updates. Emily, you wouldn't believe what's happening here. The auditors are finding far more problems than you ever imagined. What kind of problems? Expired medications, some over 6 months old, being used on patients, broken equipment marked as functional, missing Medicaid funds. It's a complete mess. And Dr. Richard? He's desperate. He tried to block the auditors, but they have a court order. And there's more. They found a scheme where he was selling expensive hospital medications to his family's private clinics. Emily felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because she was being proven right. Sadness because it confirmed that poor patients had been suffering for years. A week later, the scandal broke in the local press. The journalist Emily had reached out to publish a detailed report on the hospital's irregularities. Public hospital used as private income source, read the headline. The article mentioned that a nurse had tried to report the issues and was harassed, fired, and slandered. It didn't name Emily, but anyone familiar with the situation knew who it was. Dr. Richard gave an interview trying to defend himself, but only dug himself deeper. He claimed the nurse who blew the whistle was a resentful person who made up lies to get back at being fired for incompetence. But when journalists presented the audit's findings, he had no explanation. That same day, Emily received an unexpected call. Emily, this is Dr. Silva, director of Berkeley Medical Center. I read about your situation in the report. Yes? We'd like to offer you a job. We need competent nurses with the courage to report wrongdoing. But I'm being sued for medical negligence. We know those are false accusations. We checked your professional record. It's impeccable. Emily accepted the temporary position. It was at a smaller hospital, but the pay was nearly the same as before. At least she could cover her bills while waiting for the lawsuit's outcome. At her new job, she was welcomed as a hero. Everyone knew about her fight against corruption at Oakland Community Hospital. Several colleagues shared similar stories from other hospitals where they'd worked. The problem is, whistleblowers always suffer, said an older nurse. You were brave to see it through. It's not over yet, Emily replied. The lawsuit is still pending. But from what's in the news, you've already won in the court of public opinion. It was true. In the following days, more reports were published. Patients treated at Oakland Community Hospital began sharing their experiences. Many confirmed receiving ineffective medications or falling ill after treatment. The district attorney launched an official investigation. Dr. Richard was suspended pending the inquiry. 3 weeks after the audit began, Mrs. Margaret called with the news Emily had been waiting for. Emily, the hospital director, resigned. He said he'll focus on defending himself against the charges. And now, who's taking over? For now, a temporary administration appointed by the state, but I heard they'll have to completely restructure management. What about the staff? The nurses and technicians are celebrating. Finally, they'll be able to work in peace without fear of persecution. A month later, Dr. Michael called with news about the case. Emily, we have important developments. The Thompsons' lawyers have asked to negotiate a settlement. What kind of settlement? They're offering to recognize your rights to 30% of the hospital and pay $2 million in compensation to avoid criminal charges. What about the 51% we discovered? They refuse to even discuss that. They claim the documents are inconclusive. Do you think we should accept? It depends on what you want, Emily. 30% of the hospital plus $2 million would already be a huge victory. You'd be financially secure for life. Emily considered the offer. It was tempting. She could give her children a good life, buy a home, never worry about money again. But if I accept, they'd still control the hospital, right? Yes, you'd be a minority shareholder. And the patients who'd keep suffering. Well, with the audit and media pressure, things will surely improve, but you wouldn't have full control over decisions. Emily thought of her grandfather, who had fought to the end. She thought of the patients she'd known over the years. She thought of Margaret and all the honest staff who deserved to work in a decent place. Dr. Michael, what are our chances of winning everything? Honestly, with the evidence we have and the scandal that's erupted, I'd say they're high, maybe 70%. And if we lose, then you get nothing, and you'd have to pay their legal fees. Emily took a deep breath. Let's refuse the settlement. I want to see this through. Are you sure? I am. My grandfather didn't fight so hard for me to settle for half justice. The trial was set for 2 months later. During that time, more evidence surfaced. A former hospital administrator approached Dr. Michael with documents he'd kept for years. I always knew something was wrong, the man said. When William Johnson passed, suddenly papers appeared claiming he'd sold everything. But I'd seen the original documents. There was never any sale. The papers he brought were copies of the original contracts, clearly showing William Johnson had never sold his shares. A week before the trial, Eleanor sought out Emily. My dear, I want to give you something. It was a letter William Johnson had written to her shortly before his death. He asked me to keep this letter and give it to a family member if the need ever arose. Emily read the letter with tears in her eyes. In it, her grandfather detailed all the irregularities he'd uncovered at the hospital. He also wrote about being threatened and fearing for his life. If anything happens to me, the letter said, it won't be an accident or natural causes, and I hope one day my descendants will have the courage to continue the fight I began. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was packed. The media had turned the case into a David versus Goliath battle. On one side, a simple nurse fighting for justice. On the other, a powerful family trying to maintain illegally obtained privileges. The Thompsons' lawyer tried to discredit all documents presented by Emily. He called them old papers that could have been forged, claiming their authenticity couldn't be proven. But Dr. Michael was prepared. He presented expert reports proving the documents' authenticity. He called Eleanor to testify about William Johnson. He showed evidence of document forgery by the Thompsons. The most emotional moment came when Emily took the stand. Why are you pursuing this case? I asked the judge. Because my grandfather fought for justice and was persecuted for it. Because poor patients deserve dignified treatment. Because the truth must come to light no matter how much time has passed. Are you aware you could have accepted the settlements offered and been in a comfortable financial situation? I am, Your Honor. But there are things more important than money, like dignity and justice. The trial lasted 3 days. In the end, the judge asked for 2 days to review everything and deliver his decision. Those were the 2 longest days of Emily Johnson's life. She couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep well. Dr. Michael tried to reassure her. but she knew everything could still go wrong. On the day of the verdict, the courthouse was even more crowded. Emily arrived accompanied by her children, Dr. Michael, Mrs. Margaret, and Mrs. Eleanor. On the other side, the Thompson family had hired 3 expensive lawyers. The judge entered the room and began reading his decision. After careful review of all evidence presented, this court has reached the following conclusions. Emily felt her heart race. First, the documents submitted by the plaintiff are authentic and valid. Second, the documents used by the defendants to assume control of the hospital are crude forgeries. Third, there was misappropriation of assets that legally belonged to the Johnson family. Therefore, I rule in favor of the plaintiff, recognizing that Mrs. Emily Johnson is the rightful owner of 51% of the shares of Oakland Community Hospital. The courtroom erupted in applause. Emily wept with emotion. Ethan and Emma, not fully understanding what was happening, clapped along with everyone else. But the ruling wasn't over. Furthermore, the judge continued, I order a criminal investigation into the Thompson family members for document forgery, misappropriation, and fraudulent management. I also mandate a full audit of the hospital's accounts from the last 10 years to assess the damages caused to the institution and public funds. The new administration shall take office within 30 days. Emily could hardly believe it. She had won. Not just won. She had won everything. On the Thompsons' side, their faces were ashen. Dr. Richard tried to leave quickly, but was swarmed by reporters. Doctor, do you have any comment on the ruling? We'll appeal. This isn't over, was all he managed before getting into a car and speeding away. In the following days, the story gained national attention. Emily gave several interviews recounting her fight. What do you plan to do now that you own the hospital? A reporter asked. I intend to make it what my grandfather dreamed of, a place where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of their social or financial status. And the staff who supported you during this fight? Mrs. Margaret will be promoted to head of nursing, and every professional who had the courage to report wrongdoing will be recognized and rewarded. Is there room for forgiveness toward the Thompsons? There's room for justice. If they acknowledge their mistakes and help repair the damage, we can talk. But first they must answer for their crimes. A month later, Emily was sworn in as chair of the hospital's board. The ceremony was simple but moving. She arrived wearing the same blue nurse's uniform she had on the day her report was torn up. She insisted on it. This uniform represents all healthcare workers who fight every day to care for people, she said in her inauguration speech. I'll keep wearing it because I never want to forget where I came from and why I'm here. Her first actions as director were a 40% raise for all nurses and technicians, creation of a 24-hour free care program for low-income residents, installation of modern equipment that had been requested for years, a whistleblower channel for employees to report misconduct, ongoing training programs for all staff. In 6 months, the hospital was completely transformed. Wait lists shrank, the quality of care improved dramatically, and employee satisfaction soared. Margaret, now the nursing director, worked closely with Emily to implement the changes. Dear, your grandfather would be so proud, she said one day as they toured the newly established pediatric wing. Margaret, sometimes I still can't believe all this happened. It happened because you had courage. How many people would have given up halfway? I thought about quitting many times, especially when they threatened my kids. But you didn't, and look at the results. Emily glanced around. Children played in the new playroom, doctors and nurses worked in harmony, and patients were treated with kindness and respect. You know what makes me happiest, Margaret? What? Knowing no employee will ever be humiliated for doing the right thing again. No patient will ever get expired medication. No public funds will ever be stolen for private gain. As for the Thompsons, the criminal case was underway. Dr. Richard had lost his medical license and was barred from healthcare. His father, the former director, faced charges for running a criminal organization and embezzlement. They were offered a plea deal to cooperate and repay the stolen funds, over $15 million. Emily decided to use that money to create a foundation supporting healthcare workers who report misconduct. She wanted others to have the legal and financial protection she lacked at the start of her fight. Ethan and Emma, now 7 and 5, attended a private school. Emily had bought a spacious home in the neighborhood where she grew up, but with far more comfort. "Mommy, are you famous?" Emma asked one day, seeing her mother on a TV report. "No, sweetheart. Mommy just did what was right." "Then why do people talk about it so much?" "Because sometimes people forget to do what's right. So when someone does, everyone wants to know how." Ethan, ever observant, surprised Emily with a question. "Mommy, do you miss when we were poor?" "Why do you ask, honey?" "Because before you spent more time with us, now you work a lot." Emily paused. It was true. With all her responsibilities running the hospital, she'd been working longer hours. "You're right, Ethan, I'll manage my time better. How about we take a trip next vacation?" "Where?" Emma asked excitedly. "Wherever you want." "Disney?" They chimed in unison. Emily laughed. For the first time in her life, she could say yes to such a request without worrying about money. "Disney it is." 6 months into her term, Emily reflected on their progress. The hospital had risen from the bottom of national rankings to become one of the country's top 10 public hospitals. More importantly, 0 patients had received expired medication, 0 employees had been fired for political retaliation, and 0 public dollars had been stolen. In a special interview marking 6 months of her administration, the journalist asked, "Dr. Emily, what was the most difficult moment of this entire journey?" "It was when Dr. Richard tore up my report in front of everyone. At that moment I felt small, insignificant. I thought I'd never be able to make a difference." "And what was the most rewarding moment?" "It was yesterday, when an elderly patient stopped me in the hallway to thank me. She said it was the first time in years she felt treated with dignity at the public hospital. That's when I understood that all the struggle was worth it." If you could give advice to others who witness injustices, what would you say? "I'd say we shouldn't be afraid to do what's right. It may be hard, it may be painful, but the truth always comes out. And when it does, the right people stand by our side." "What about forgiveness? Can you forgive the Thompsons?" Emily thought before answering. "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or letting things slide. It means not holding on to bitterness. I hope they learn from their mistakes and become better people, but they must face the consequences of their actions." "Are there plans to expand this management model to other hospitals?" "Yes. We're already in talks with administrators from other states. The idea is to create a network of truly efficient and honest public hospitals. We want to prove that quality in public service is possible." At the end of the interview, Emily spoke directly to the camera. "I want to dedicate all of this to the memory of my grandfather, William Johnson, who began this fight over 40 years ago. And I want to say to everyone working in healthcare, you are heroes. Caring for people is the most important job in the world." Exactly 7 months after her report was torn up, Emily walked down the same hallway where she had been humiliated. But now it was different. Staff greeted her with respect and warmth. Patients smiled as she passed by. She stopped at the exact spot where the pieces of her report had been scattered. Now, there was a bulletin board with photos of the employees of the month, always chosen by patients who wanted to thank them for exceptional care. Mrs. Margaret approached. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be. If my report hadn't been torn up here, maybe I never would have had the courage to see this through. And I'm thinking about my grandfather. I'm sure he's proud. I'm sure too. And you know what? I think he planned all this." "How so?" "I think he knew that one day someone in the family would carry on his fight. That's why he kept all those documents. That's why he wrote that letter to Mrs. Eleanor. He was planting seeds for the future." Emily smiled. "Maybe. And if that's true, I can say the harvest has been plentiful." That night at home, Emily put her children to bed and sat in the room she had turned into an office. On the wall, she had framed the first report she'd ever written about expired medications, the one that had been torn up. Next to it, she had also framed the letter her grandfather had written to Mrs. Eleanor, and between them, a photo of him she had found among the documents. Looking at the picture, she whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. I promise to keep tending to your dream." And so a simple nurse whose dignity had been attacked and whose work had been dismissed became the owner of the hospital where she was once humiliated. But more than that, she turned that place into a symbol that justice, even if delayed, always comes to those who have the courage to fight for it. The hospital that was once synonymous with corruption and neglect became a national model for efficient public management and compassionate care. And it all started with a nurse who dared to write a report about expired medications. End of the story. Now we want to know, what did you think of Emily's transformation? Do you believe she made the right decisions throughout this journey? Let us know in the comments which part of the story moved you the most, and if you know of similar cases where people fought against injustice. Don't forget to leave a like if the story inspired you. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other uplifting and inspiring stories like this one.